Hey guys, welcome to Pages with Sidra. Today, we're starting chapter 33 of Surviving as a Genius on Borrowed Time. If you haven't watched the previous chapters, make sure to check them out on my channel. Now, without any delay, let's dive into the chapter. For the first time, the master of the Tyrant Sword sect wore an expression of disbelief. His eyes were locked on Yunshin. Yunshin stood tall and unwavering. Tyrant Sword sect master, he said, lifting the severed head of the fierce Azura sword into the air. I told you, I'd take something. His voice, amplified with chi, rang across the battlefield. Warriors from both sects paused, their gazes drawn to the sight. One by one, their movements slowed, then stopped. Haiyan Wenchong stepped forward. He looked first at the head Yunshin held, then at Yunshin himself. He took a deep breath and bellowed with all his might. The guest of the Zhongnan sect, Yung Yunshin, the sword saint of Shinya, from Desolate Fortress, has severed the head of a Tyrant Sword sect elder. The announcement hit like thunder. The right fiend Rakshasa's sword? A martial artist from Zhongnan blinked in disbelief. Are they talking about that old master? Even members of the Tyrant Sword sect were stunned. How could this happen? That child, he killed the fierce Azura sword? Unbelievable. The fierce Azura sword is dead. What Yunshin had just done, it went against all logic. Even the masters of the Zhongnan sect stood frozen in disbelief. In that young man's hands was the head of one of the Tyrant Sword sect's greatest elders. And suddenly, the warriors' will to fight began to fade. Even those from the Tyrant Sword sect felt their confidence start to crumble. Wenchong's booming voice echoed again, sealing the moment. He has beheaded the elder of the Tyrant Sword sect. A thunderous roar erupted from the Zhongnan sect's warriors. He had timed it perfectly. Wenchong not only announced the feat, he cemented Yunshin's name and glory for the martial world to remember. Could Yung So Hyop really have done it? Yi Yilsin whispered in disbelief. The Eight Fiend sword is dead. A martial artist shouted in pure elation. Wow! The young masters of Zhongnan erupted into cheers. Some leapt in joy. Others stared at Yunshin in awe. He really did it. From amidst the crowd, the sword immortal chuckled. That boy, he stirred up quite the storm now. With renewed strength, Yi Yilsin and the sword immortal began cutting through the enemy lines. Their swords blazed with unstoppable force. The morale shift was visible. The Zhongnan sect surged forward like a flood. The Tyrant Sword sect was overwhelmed. Their formation began to collapse. Sect leader, one of the Tyrant Sword sect's warriors, shouted to their master, who was locked in combat with the Zhongnan leader. Zhongnan's momentum is no joke. We should fall back and regroup. The sect leader hesitated. His fighting spirit raged within him, unwilling to retreat. But then, he turned his eyes toward Yunshin. Yunshin was still in battle. But at that very moment, as if sensing the sect leader's gaze, he looked back. Their eyes met across the battlefield. And in that silent moment, the sect master of the Tyrant Sword sect engraved the boy's face into his memory. A storm had begun, and at the center of it all was Yung Yunshin. As Yunshin locked eyes with the sect leader of the Tyrant Sword sect, a thought passed through his mind. A formidable opponent, one I can barely bear to face. Even just meeting his gaze sent a shiver through Yunshin's very soul. And yet, for years should suffice for you as well. The battle was over. The Tyrant Sword sect was utterly defeated. What stood now was the Zhongnan sect's overwhelming victory. The next day arrived with clarity and stillness. From the hands of the Zhongnan sect's head disciple, Yunshin received something remarkable, the flowing cloud plaque, a symbol of the highest honor. With this plaque, any sect under Zhongnan's name would treat him with reverence. Even the Zhong family, once a branch of Zhongnan, would have called him a savior. If you ever need the sword of the main sect, said Gu Yangqian, send word. Even if it is for the politics of the Desolate Fortress, we will aid you once. There was a faint, almost hidden warmth in the sword master of the Western Heavens' usually cold voice. I will gratefully accept, Yunshin replied. He accepted the plaque with humility, his fingers brushing over the cloud engraved in its wooden surface. Now, he said, I steady. It seems it's time to hear the story. Indeed, Yi Yilsin nodded, standing beside Gu Yangqian. You are entitled to it. The secret behind the Zhong family's annihilation was finally brought to light. Everything, Guyangqion said, began with the heavenly tree. The heavenly tree? Yunshin asked, brows furrowed. Yes, the divine tree that sustains the world itself. All universal principles are rooted through the heavenly tree. It consumes vast energy, and the land beneath it flourishes. That's why the Zhang family, landowners of Xinya, held such fertile ground, because the tree's roots ran deep through it. Yunshin listened in silence. Every precious elixir, every legendary herb, they originate from principles born of that tree. It's not something martial arts or sorcery can replicate. So, the Zhang family was destroyed because Gu Yangqion's face darkened. It is said that the Lord of the Desolate Fortress maintains his formidable martial arts by consuming the fruits of the heavenly tree. The Tyrant Sword Sect and Blood Flame Sect, enemies of the Desolate Fortress, saw the Zhang family's land as a necessary sacrifice. To them, erasing a small martial family was a small price to pay. Now, Xinya is nothing more than a barren wasteland, under their control. Yunshin could only stand there, speechless. Guilt and regret. Voice, soft, heavy. Yi Yilsin sighed beside him. A quiet voice, tinged with sorrow. At that time, we received a letter from the Lord of the Desolate Fortress. It was a plea to protect the Zhang family. But ultimately, we failed. There was a long silence. And then Yi Yilsin bowed his head slightly. I am deeply sorry, to you, Jungsan, and to Haya. The sky above was endlessly blue. Not a single cloud in sight. It was the kind of sky that made goodbyes feel heavier. At the foot of Mount Zhongnan, Yunshin and Wenchang stood with packed bags, ready to set off once again. A small crowd had gathered to see them off. Their time within the Zhongnan sect had built something rare in this world, genuine goodwill. Yunshin gently comforted his young niece, who clung to him with teary eyes. Grow up and come visit, he said. When you become a master, the Desolate Fortress will welcome you. As his eyes met those of his second brother, Zhang Jungsan, he noticed the complex look on the older man's face. A mix of regret, pride, and silent apology. Yunshin simply gave him a nod. Their bond hadn't grown strong enough to share words without walls. But one day, maybe. Just ahead, Miaohua stepped forward, parting her red lips slightly. Next time may I go with you? Yunshin raised an eyebrow. If there are no missions, maybe I should learn the Cloud Sword Dragon style. A subtle smile tugged at her lips. And somewhere behind them, the Sword Immortal let out a hearty laugh. Ah, the young one's forging ties. It warms an old man's heart. You speak like you're retiring, Yunshin replied with a slight smirk. You look like you've got 100 years left. Laughter echoed around them. The air was filled with the strange comfort of camaraderie, like a family formed not by blood, but by shared trials. The Sword Immortal gave him a gentle nod. Yunshin, I hope you achieve your goal. A simple sentence, yet packed with meaning. Yunshin bowed deeply, and with Wenchang by his side, he turned his back on Mount Zhongnan without a word. And then stood waiting, crowded and noisy. There are a lot of wanderers here, muttered Wenchang, settling beside Yunshin near the entrance. It was so full, they were forced to share a table with middle-aged men. Polite greetings were exchanged. The Manhwa sect secretly received help from the Desolate Fortress. One man whispered loudly, Are the 9 great sects and the fortress on their way down? Zhongnan's the only one still standing strong in Shaanxi. A noble-looking young man sitting nearby smiled politely. You must be new to the martial world. If you want to live long, keep your mouth shut. Even his 2 female companions nodded with slight smiles. But the man across the table didn't back down. New? Huh. I've roamed more places than you can name. You think I'm wrong? Why else would the Desolate Fortress fail to catch the stealthy demon? The blue-eyed demon's sword lost an eye. Supreme Masters? What a joke. He looked around, waiting for agreement. Thunk. Without warning, a chopstick stabbed deep into the table. It shook violently. The surface cracked around the impact. The inn fell into stunned silence. All eyes turned toward the entrance. A boy in a long blue robe stood there. Calm, steady, unshaken. Yunshin, his sky-blue eyes locked onto the loud martial artist. That story, he said quietly, but within that calm voice was a presence, a wave of chi that came from the Zhang family's dynamic training. Even in a crowd this loud, not a soul missed his words. Tell me the details. The bustling inn froze. The room had turned to stone. The wind dared not blow, and somewhere in the hearts of those present, a quiet fear began to bloom. That's it for today's chapter recap. If you enjoyed the breakdown, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated with the latest manga, manhwa, and manhwa recaps. Got thoughts on today's chapter? Drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear your take on the story. See you in the next one. Until then, keep turning the pages.